All right, let's kick this first talk off in the auditorium. Today, to start us off, we have Rich Everts, who's the co-founder and CEO of Suji, which is a company that does home artificial intelligence for people with disabilities like Alzheimer's and autism. He's the founder of Lancaster AI, and today he's going to be talking about the real reason we should all be afraid of artificial intelligence. Rich.
All right. Can you hear me? All right. So thank you, Court, and thank you, Joel. I don't know if you're here, but I'm really excited to be back at CPOSC, and definitely the best conference in Central PA here. So I don't have a lot of time. I only have 30 minutes. And so I'm here to tell you I'm not going to be able to answer questions here today. However, my goal is to be here throughout the day. So if you have a question about something or you want to talk more, I'm always revising different ways of thinking about this, ways I look at this problem. So I'm more than happy to sit down and talk with you at any point. Please come up and talk to me. So one of my favorite quotes is by Winston Churchill, where he says, "Truth is incontrovertible. Malice may attack it, ignorance may deride it, but in the end, there it is." And so today, I'm going to give you a little bit of truth, and sometimes it might be a little uncomfortable, so much so that I hope CPOSC invites me back next year. But I want to make sure you get your money's worth, and you see things as a lot of people in the industry are seeing them right now. AI is very related to open source, so heavily intertwined that if you're involved in AI at all, you're always using open source tools. So I'm going to describe a problem, maybe a little bit of my perspective on what that problem is, and maybe some solutions, and we'll go through there. And don't mind me pacing a little bit. I like walking when I think, so I hope it's not too distracting. I'll try to sit here while we go through it. So we're going to move with purpose as we go through this. I'll try not to rush. So the main question that people ask is, will humanity survive the AI revolution? And to that I have to say, I think without a doubt Homo sapiens will survive the AI revolution. However, it is improbable that the spirit of the West will. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So let's look at one of the first real challenges. And this is really where we're going to get a little controversial to start off with. So data is a new strategic resource. So like in past ages, you had things like oil or salt. You know, empires would rise and fall with those, and they still do with oil to many extents. Data is this new strategic resource in the world. With it, this is how we power artificial intelligence. And here in the West, which is what I'm going to focus on primarily, you have Amazon, Facebook, you have these first-tier companies who control most of the data. And then you have your second row, your second-tier companies there that control the second parts. As many of you know, Microsoft just bought GitHub because they want access to 28 million developers and what and how you develop. And that's what they bought it for and why they're still a second tier. It's funny because as the number 1 and 2 companies in America, they're still in the second tier with Apple in terms of data. And Apple is in the second tier because, and I commend them for this, they've taken a particular stance on privacy, which has limited their data collection abilities, despite I know they're not as popular in the open source community sometimes for their stance on other things. But in terms of data, they've actually made a good mix there. And then you have your telecommunications companies here in the lower left-hand corner, and you have your financial companies in the lower right. Now, what we're going to be focusing on is these top 1 and 2 tier companies that you have here. One of the things that you will notice about them is that they are all in the same industry, and they control the strategic resource of data. And so why is this a challenge when that's what really creates AI? Well, so let's look at political donations. And this is a controversial topic, I know, but one of the reasons that we look at this in particular, this is a study out of Stanford University, okay? And one of the reasons we look at this is because people who tend to support the same kind of candidates, not necessarily the same parties, because forget parties, but the same kinds of candidates within those parties, tend to think about the world in the same way. They see the same kind of problems as the most important problems. They see the same kind of solutions as the solutions we should take to those problems. They see things like, every situation out there, if it looks like a nail, they all see the same kind of hammer, is what happens. And so what we have here, if you look in the Stanford study, is if you look at technology, and I know it's kind of hard to see, I'll try to blow it up for you here, that the technology industry is so far left, you have a pretty significant, you can't see the lines on here, but there are 2 standard levels of deviation to the left there, it's very L-shaped and almost primarily supported there. Versus the most right-wing industry which you have, which is the oil and gas company, of course, you can see that it's actually more U-shaped. And so there tends to be actually more ideological diversity even in the oil and gas companies than you find in our technology field, which is a challenge because we're often looking at the same problems the same way and coming up with the same kind of solutions. And this is a real challenge. And so when you have someone who controls a strategic resource, who thinks the same way about the world, you end up with a lot of similar problems. And it looks kind of like this. Okay, some of you Stranger Things fans, I hope, out there. But really, it's acting as the gatekeeper around this strategic resource. Everybody tends to think the same way. Groupthink is a real problem, especially with the AI field. And you have your little board guide there for your data collection. And let's not pretend for a second, though, that this is not the neon god that Simon and Garfunkel warned us about. Okay? And if you don't believe me, think about the sounds of silence you hear from the tools built by our industry. When people at cafes, when they don't talk to each other, they just sit in their phones, families at dinner, or even couples out on a romantic evening. How often do we sit in their phone and the sounds of silence build? Just something to think about. All right, let's move on. I think I described that problem. So how do we get around this? We have to decentralize the data. This is a full talk within itself. I'm only going to briefly gloss over this. So GDPR, if you're in web dev, you know this was a fun thing to handle the last 18 months, 2 years essentially. But in Europe, they figured out a way for right to be forgotten, and you have more power over your data, which is important. I like this idea of decentralizing the internet. If you may know Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who many consider the founding father of the modern internet, came up with Solid, which is up at MIT. It's a way of being able to encapsulate your own data. And I definitely highly recommend looking into that. Open Data Institute he also put together. And he put these together because he was sick and tired of the ad-driven internet that was created today and the way it controls information. And so this was his solution to it. And I highly recommend looking at the Open Data Institute to open up data sets so that big companies don't dominate the space. Now, the other thing that you hear about often is, well, actually, you don't hear about it often, which is why I'm going to mention it here today, is the 1956 consent decree by AT&T. Essentially, in 1956, a mere 9 years after creating the transistor, okay, one of the most important inventions of, I don't know, the last couple hundred years, the government came in and said, Ma Bell, you have to open that up, and you have to give that for basically free to everybody in the country. And the reason they did that is because we were facing an existential threat at that time, what we thought of the Soviet Union. And this was, we didn't realize it, but a year before Sputnik. And so they forced them to give up their patents in order to increase innovation. And many people don't realize this, but this is one of the great ways that innovation increased enough to get us on the moon a few short years later by forcing them to do this. So people are starting to talk about the 1956 consent decree to open up information against some of the big companies out there. Okay, let's move on to another topic here. Political system breakdown, okay? What do I mean by this? We have to be wary of this, a real danger. So some of you know this is deepfakes. That's actually Nicolas Cage's face on Captain Jean-Luc Picard, and they can make it seem like Nicolas Cage is talking like Picard. And by the way, I can't wait for the new series. It's going to be awesome, in case you don't know that. But you can put anybody's face on someone else's and make it seem like they're talking. Now, these are using GANs, generative adversarial networks. It's computers trained against computers. They're very hard to train, but they're getting better and better and better. And I would say within the next 2 to 3 years, you won't be able to distinguish the reality there. Now, you also have something called Lyrebird, which will take a minute of your voice and make you say anything. Make you say anything, okay? So when you combine these two together, fake news. And I mean, you thought 2016 was bad, or even 2018, you ain't seen nothing yet, I promise you. Because we can make anybody say anything. And if you had a few $1 million and a little bit of time and some people who knew how to handle GANs, you could alter the election of any G20 nation in the world right now, let alone what we're going to be able to do in 5 years. And the only solution to this is to essentially hope that the GANs that train against the GANs are better. So you're hoping that the one computer is smarter than the other computer. That's it. That's the only way you're going to be able to tell. That's how to distinguish some of these what we call deep fakes and some of the other things that are going on. Okay? Something to be aware of, especially in civics. Be wary of things that you see from now on. Okay, now this is why everybody came to the talk, I know. You want to know, am I going to have a job in 10 years, right? Okay. So let's take a look at this. I borrowed this from Kai-Fu Lee, who came up with a couple of different charts. I combined them into one chart to make it easier. So here on the left, you have low abstraction and high abstraction. This is about variables in the world. So if you have a lot of high and a lot of variables in your particular job, you have to abstract them away and focus on what's important. And then you end up having this social versus asocial in terms of how you actually run it. So let's take a look at them real quick. These are the jobs that are probably going to be gone within 10 years for the most part. You have fast food. You have H&R Block, which is things that can be highly optimized quickly. You have radiology, where the open source community the computer vision is already better than most radiologists. And trucking, we haven't quite solved the vehicles yet, but when we do, truckers are the first ones to go, unfortunately, in the logistics chain. These things are going to be safe for a long time. So this is things like beauty and hair, because robots don't have good finger control. So those are going to be around for a long time. Mental health, CEOs and leadership, and law, because they require a lot of creativity, generally, and a lot of variables. Okay, so let's take a look real quick up here. These are red and green. These are things that we could get rid of, but we're going to keep, because we like the human veneer over top of them. We like dealing with humans. So what are those kind of things? Those are like bartenders, despite the talk that's going on today, I know. I can't wait for that one either. But bartenders, waiters, educators, and doctors. We're going to have a lot of human-machine team learning probably over the next 10 to 20 years. So we're going to need less of these people, but we're still going to keep them because, specifically, we want that human veneer. Now, these down here, like taxi drivers, plumbers, and digital media production, are probably going to go away. And we're going to have a lot of human-machine team learning over the next 10 to 20 years in building things, but we're going to need them less and less. And even today in digital media, I can use AI to build CSS layouts, and low-level programming is probably going to be gotten rid of here in not too long. Okay, and so how do we deal with this? This is the hot topic. UBI is what everybody wants to talk about. This is the solution that we have in the tech world. So in case you're not familiar, UBI is this idea that you take a block grant of money and you give it to people to live on because all the jobs are going to be gone. And that's essentially what UBI is. And they estimate, supporters of UBI estimate that about 50% of the jobs are going to be gone with this AI revolution. 50%. Okay, so that is quite a lot. So UBI has had mixed results. It's been tried in about 6 to 12 countries in smaller doses, and it's had some successes and some failures. And so, how do we look at it? Well, let's look at it as a more large deployment, what that would actually seem like. So in the United States, if you were to give every U.S. adult citizen $10,000 in order to live on, it would cost about $1.5 trillion a year. So let's just nip this one in the bud right now. Here's the political reality that you actually have to deal with. If you take a look at this orange area here and this little purple area here, that's the United States military defense budget, $800 million spent last year. So even if you eliminated the entire United States military, which is pretty much the guarantor of all international free trade, and then you're still left with a $700 million shortfall. How are you going to pay for that? And so are you going to hit Social Security? Are you going to hit the health, Medicaid, Medicare? The political reality is that we're probably not going to be able to do that in this particular form. Now, people are saying and suggesting maybe we redefine how we hand out money, and that's an interesting proposition. So perhaps what we do is, instead of giving people food stamps and Medicaid, maybe we just put it in one block grant and put it and say, this is your universal income, and you can do that, and we rely on some optimizations within the organization of the government. Here's the other challenge, is that we're just being a little arrogant, I think, to think that there's not going to be new industries that come about. So, for instance, 20 years ago, what about SEO? Who would have thought we'd be building industries around that? How about social media with 15 years ago? What new industries is AI going to create? And to think not just about what these companies actually build, but think about all the support systems around them. Think about what goes into content production, creating ads, marketing. Think about all those jobs created to support these new industries as well. So I think that the 50% is a little bit of fear-mongering that you're going to hear. I think, though, that you will see around 15 to 20% here in the West, which is not an insignificant amount of jobs lost. But what that means is that I think with the new industries and as well as doing a little bit of reorg and economic development within the federal budget, we'll probably be okay to make it through here. It won't be easy, but we'll be able to make it through. It won't be catastrophic. Okay, this is my exciting part. So let's talk about some of the implementation challenges and dangers of AI that you see out there. So let's look at the first one. This is the, sorry about the small picture, it's the X-47BC Pegasus made by Northrop. It is an unmanned drone, essentially, and it comes with a kill switch option in it. Now, it's not built in. You have to request it when you build it. Actually, I don't think they're building it anymore, but they are moving on with other unmanned drones at the moment. But the kill switch option essentially gives the kill decision for the machine to the AI and takes it out of the human hands. Now, this has already been made. DARPA's already been working on a ton of stuff in this area, and I understand where DARPA's coming from. Because if you look at it from a military perspective, if the command structure is eliminated, you need to be able to still carry out attacks. You need to be able to defend, okay? And DARPA is looking at it from that angle. However, this is obviously a really huge moral issue. Even this past week, the Vatican was out in Geneva pushing against these unmanned vehicles. And there's tons of groups that are saying we should outlaw them like we do landmines and other things like that. I don't think we're going to win this one. And the reason is because there is an AI gap, if you will, if you're familiar with that term. And it's not just the big actors that are going to be going into this. It's going to be the low state actors or the smaller state actors and other minor groups that are going to take this. And the real dangers of AI is not that DARPA is going to create, this Skynet, okay? Because I know some people at DARPA, they're really smart people and they've watched The Terminator. Okay, they get it, all right? They understand the problems. But it's going to be some of the smaller state actors and some of these smaller groups that are going to inadvertently, in this rush to win, are going to cause some issues, I think. All right, and this AI gap, we're just going to keep moving forward. So let's take a look at the second implementation, real danger that you have in AI, which is, this is Equivant. They create Compass software. So bail and sentence links are now being decided by AI. So the judges will use AI to figure out how should I sentence or set bail for people. Now, this is a really interesting problem, and I'm going to say, I never thought I would say this from a stage, but we have Kim Kardashian to thank for something here, okay? And what that is that when Kim Kardashian went to go meet President Trump for that pardon of Alice Johnson, if you remember hearing about that, this was a seminal moment on the political landscape, and I know it doesn't seem like it, but really what you had is one side of the political aisle which is very interested in social justice causes, meeting with the other side of the political aisle which is interested in criminal justice reform. And that actually gave me a lot of hope that there might be some political capital out there to solve this particular AI problem, which is going to require a tech solution combined with the political capital. I'm actually optimistic that we might be able to fix this, because the problem is that yes, there's biases in here, and somebody just lost a lawsuit this past year saying that the AI shouldn't be sentencing people. They lost that, so AI is here to stay. But I think we might be able to fix it if enough people are interested in really doing this, and I think there are enough people. So I'm optimistic that we can fix this danger still. Okay, so this is Shenzhen, which is the Silicon Valley of hardware. This is out in the Far East in China. I call this the Chinese stomping. So it's essentially that the Chinese own the supply chain here. And the reason that this matters is because in AI right now, most of the, we're in the implementation phase. We're not so much in the discovery phase. There are new things, but they're smaller nuances right now. We're moving into hardware. Hardware is where the answer is for AI in optimizations and being able to move things forward, computer vision, people like NVIDIA, building special ASICs, all those kind of things. That's what's happening right now. And the fact is that if you're in Shenzhen and you're an entrepreneur, you can start a company, you can have your manufacturing there and hang out around town, just go across town, and you can innovate so much faster versus us here in the West who have to send things out, come back. I can't begin to tell you how many startup founders I've talked to who bemoan the fact that if they're doing hardware, they have to spend half of the year in China trying to figure out crap. They can't build their companies. here. And it's a real challenge. But I don't think we're going to win this one either, because I think that the Chinese have established firm manufacturing dominance of the x86 architectures, maybe some of the ARM, and they have the manufacturing capacity to continue to dominate this. Okay? But we're going to come back to the Chinese on another topic in particular. So how do we solve this problem? Because this is a major problem. So how do we solve the supply chain? And so I think we have to move past the von Neumann architecture in order to do this. And what I mean by that is, if you're not familiar with von Neumann, he's the person who came up with the computing architecture where you calculate information and you store information in another location, and then you fetch that store process. And going in between those, you have this thing called a bus, right, that passes the information back and forth. And that's the slowest part of your computer, always has been. So one of the ways to be able to move around this is to rebuild the newest architectures that we're going to design here in the West, or in friendly governments. So for instance, I'm going to tell you what it's going to look like in the next 2 to 10 years. Okay, so I'm going to explain who these people are. This is Carl Friston. He's like the Tesla of neuroscience. This is Rodney Brooks, who is up at MIT, and he works on embodied cognition. Now, this right here is the IBM True North chip, and this is the Intel Loihi chip. They are in a class called neuromorphic chips, designed more specifically around how a neuron looks and acts. And if you're interested in it, they are looking for people to help build compilers. They need OS-level programs being made. This is a completely new architecture, and they need help. And if you want, everybody's pouring money into it. It's a good field to get into. But essentially what it is Carl Friston is saying, essentially, we used to do this AI stuff where we would calculate loss, so deep learning. So for instance, you're minimizing loss all the time. That's how you move the model forward. And Carl Friston says that we should do something called active inferencing, which is a different way of looking at it. And you can look into that in free energy. And Rodney Brooks is talking more about things like embodied cognition, where you need a complete system in order to be able to understand the AI. It's a lot more complicated. I encourage you to dig into it. But combined with the neuromorphic chips, this is where you see the next 2 to 10 years and where a lot of the hardware advances in AI are going to come from. And that can be built here. Now, over the next 10 to 25 years, these are things like quantum chips. This is nanoelectronics. Hey, maybe graphene will finally take off. MEM resistors and DNA computing. Those are all massively parallel, or they completely bypass the von Neumann architecture. But we're just not there yet. Now, quantum computing, we're doing pretty well. But the Chinese are still ahead of us in that particular area. They're more ahead in the implementation phase of that. But Google is hiring if you know how to build a quantum neural network right now. I just got notification 2 weeks ago. So go for it. Okay, so there's a real challenge about who gives birth to this intelligence. And the reason, let me explain. So in 2016, the AlphaGo defeated the world Go champion. You barely heard about it here in the West. But in China, this was like their Sputnik moment. Like, Go is more important than chess ever was in the West. That's how foundational it is to their culture. And to have an AI defeat them was huge. And so what they did is they basically took President Obama's plan that nobody listened to because he was in his last year of office, but it was a great plan, and essentially copied it and said, we're going to put, in 2020, we're going to be here, and 2030, we're going to be the sole AI superpower in the world. And there's a challenge with this. And I know this is going to be a little controversial, but the way I look at it is that this isn't about the Chinese people, who are actually wonderful and amazing people. Unbelievable what they have accomplished in the last 35 years in their nation. Unbelievable. One of the modern miracles, okay? Well, we are talking about the Chinese Communist Party being in charge and having control over how these new intelligence are made. And you got to remember that this is the same party whose founders said that the political power comes from the barrel of a gun, or that they're creating the social credit system in AI, which you may have heard of. I've been warning about for a year, but now it's in the mainstream press, and everybody's like, oh, social credit. It was so terrible that we put it in a fiction science dystopian TV show and laughed at it. But the Chinese are actually putting it together where things your brother, mother, or whatever do can affect your access to state resources or even the train to get to work. We're talking about a government that took 1 million people up in the Xinjiang province and put them in re-education camps based solely on their religion without any due process at all. And now they're going to put them under efficient AI monitoring systems around the clock. Okay? Now we're not talking NSA meta-tagging, we're talking full-on surveillance. Okay? This is the same government that basically took what I consider one of the great obscenities of our time, evil, if you even want to use that word, the Great Firewall of China, which watches like the eye of Mordor over every citizen looking for wrongthink. Okay? I know we're not good, we're not perfect in the West, and we got a ton of our own problems here, and many of you here know what those are more than most. But that's not us. And if we ever become like that, like Theon Greyjoy, we are truly lost. Okay? So, how is the West going to deal with this situation? I'm just here to show you what's actually happening. We're creating new AI alliances, and this is a specific thing that's happening where we work in alliance with a lot of these regional actors, and you may see this in the news. You may wonder why all these people are working together. It's sort of as a counterbalance here. And we're going to work with them to protect supply chains, which are important to AI. We're going to work on them for education, discovery, financial, because you need a lot of money to do it as well. And so these new AI alliances are going to build and grow here. Okay, so if you haven't thought I've been controversial enough, here's where I lose most of you. Okay, so I'm just going to go for it. It makes me sad to think that this is so controversial. In America today, we have this situation where we are really in a Game of Thrones where we beat the living crap out of each other from both sides of the aisle. And I'm here to tell you there is only one war that really matters right now, and is this war for this new intelligence. Elon Musk is right. This is not something like, I think he's wrong that he's talking about electricity or even industrial revolution. I'm here to tell you that as this grows and unfolds over the next 30 to 40 years, we're talking about something that is going to be as important as the written word, the wheel, like transforming of our species like nothing else that we've seen in millennia. And so this is the only war that matters, is who controls the first steps of this new intelligence. And so if one side of the political aisle wants to carry on an economic war that forces supply chains for innovation and entrepreneurs back into the nation, then I would support that. And likewise, on the other side of the political aisle, if they want to put money into things that we can't afford because they want a moonshot project for AI, like the Manhattan Project, I'm going to support that too. I don't care what color the party is. I'm interested in this war right here. That's how important this thing is. Okay? So I know I'm running out of time. So let me wrap it up here with some final thoughts. I don't think the spirit of the West is going to win this. How on earth can freedom of thought and physical capital exist in a world that's going to be ruled by ruthless efficiency and data collection as a source of power? How are we going to do this? I don't know. I don't have the answer. And one of the great opportunities and joys I've had in my life is to be able to read a lot of philosophers and historians over time. So I've gone through Thucydides, Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, up through Cicero, Seneca, Aurelius, Tacitus, Augustine, Aquinas, and even some of the moderns like Locke, Hume, Burke, and Montesquieu. And you start to see, if you look at how things unfolded in history and see the patterns, how unbelievably unique and strange this American experiment was that started so long ago, and how wildly successful it's been beyond anyone's imagination. I mean, it's been unbelievable being able to take cultures and groups from around the world and constantly be progressing and moving forward and constantly expanding the idea of what freedom and liberty is and moving physical capital and economic superpower unlike anything that the world's seen. It's been truly astounding what's been able to be accomplished here with that. But I don't think we're going to make it because, number one, we don't have the work ethic anymore. And I can tell you, I could see in the ads for people hiring for AI in China, and they advertise 996 as the good jobs. That's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. I want you to try selling that to developers today, okay? I don't think we take enough risk, okay? Because VCs here put all their money, 80% of their money goes to less than 5 cities in America. And me, I'm always for the underdogs. I mean, I'm like the brown coats of the tech world, if you know the Firefly, okay? And So for me, I'm up till 2, 3 a.m. working 6 and 7 days a week on that home AI not because I believe it's just a good business idea, but because I believe that it's important to the future of my culture and what I do. It's one of the reasons we started Lancaster AI, is because we wanted to be able to get people who have almost no experience with AI and introduce them so they understand the concepts of how biases work and feature sets, right? And to people who are more advanced, who are publishing papers out of it. We gave a 10-week free course this past fall to make that happen out of our own time to do that. And, you know, in the end, it's never really been about all these raging robots and these awful algorithms that are the real danger. It's always been this reflection of the fears we carry within of our own shadows, is what it is. Okay? And so maybe I'm hoping some of you out there who got a little rebellious streak like me, okay, like to punch authority in the nose every once in a while. Maybe we can join in common cause a little bit in different areas, in the things that you do out there, so that we can make the West, sort of like the horn of Helm's hammerhand, if you will, sound in the deep one last time. And that would make this new AI that we give birth to over the next 30 to 40 years more like the oracle from the Matrix than the architect. And that would be worth all the dangers that we face today. Thank you.